Welcome to the Church of the Palms. My name is Kathy Futrell, and we are here to do watercolor. Today we're going to do a little bit of a refresher. So this is called Basics of Watercolor with the ideas of techniques that are used in watercolor. So come join us. All right, we're ready to go. Thank you for joining us. I have a chart that sort of explains a lot about the watercolor process in terms of color mixing. So there is the palette that we use, and watercolor is either transparent, opaque, or staining. So I've actually put T for transparent on the Aurelian yellow, where is my bumblebee yellow. When you see my palette, you'll understand these two colors look like they're exactly the same. The truth is, a transparent color can go over another color, and you can see it's a transparent paint, whereas this one has more density. It's called opaque. A staining color is very difficult to get out, like your CAD. This well, actually, my alizarin crimson is my most staining red. My most staining green is that Joe's green that I often use. It's very similar to the Windsor green, which is very staining. And anytime you want to use an opaque like cerulean blue, what you get is a bit more white in the paint. So let's look at the warm colors over here on this side of the palette, and my cooler colors, although I really like to say that my light green, skip green, to me, is a yellow green. So it almost needs to go over here. I just have it here because all my greens are here. These are all my reds and purples, which are the purple. My royal amethyst is a color. And by the way, these are Chief Joe's colors. These are called American Journey. However, they're very compatible to any other brand that you wish to use. Winsor Newton, Danielle Smith, all of the paints today are such great quality. You'll notice that my three primary colors are placed here, and I'm talking about here intensity of color. So this is obviously a pale yellow, which means that you can see even in this wash right here, I have a paler, this has more water, this has less water. So the intensity of color is also the way you mix it, but it's also the amount of water that is added to the color. For instance, see how pale these colors are, and yet how brilliant and bright these three primary colors, my yellow, red, and blue. So this is the amount of water that's been left out of the color to get more intense, but at the same time, I have mixed its complement. The complement is the color that is opposite the color wheel. So here's our yellow and blue, which are mixed to make green. Here's our yellow and our red, which is mixed to make an orange. But if we cross over to the opposite color, for instance, this orange and blue, it takes more blue than orange to make this gray neutral. It takes about half and half of the red-green combination to get a neutral color, and I call it dark. I call it dark, I call it gray, I call it sometimes mud, but the point is when you mix two complementary colors, and they're positively wonderful when you use them in a painting because they create a lot of contrast, but at the same time when they're mixed together they will make a neutral. So I do not paint with any black because I can achieve black basically with red and green or blue and orange. And you see these are two different blacks. This one is a paler black because when you mix the purple with the yellow, you end up getting usually a little shade lighter. All right, so value is an important concept. I don't know if you can see this down here. This is also called color contrast, and I've taken a gray square for you to see the relationship. There's the pop that happens with complements next to gray. So it's called a complementary contrast or simultaneous contrast when you set two colors next to each other that are opposite. Now, that's my chart to explain a little bit about color theory and about values, but I now want to say a little something else about value and its importance. When you are doing a subject that is light on dark or dark on light, you get another kind of contrast, and that's a very important concept. I know I'm going over a lot of things that we know a bit about, and here's my palette. which matches the palette I had that I was showing you. I do want to speak next about the techniques of watercolor. And the techniques of watercolor basically are wet and wet, graded wash. I'm really just going to call this wash. And you see all my little notes over here, I'll explain, and dry brush. So I'm going to be demoing the wet and wet. I'm going to demo the graded wash and the dry brush. And at some point today, you might want to shoot a photo of my techniques of watercolor, because that's the basic idea today. But I want to say that when you do wet and wet, that you can get a wash that is blended. So I'm also calling that blended or flat wash. A flat wash is just on dry paper, basically. So wet on dry to get a wash. When you layer one color on top of another color, if it's dry, is called a glaze. And that's how we build paintings. If we are doing dry brush, then we are creating a texture, a rough texture on the paper, because the water has been eliminated out of the brush. But we also can create what is called calligraphy by having a brush that is not so wet, but somewhere between a wash and a dry brush, that gives us a beautiful line, such as, and I say this, I think Sid gave me this poster when we went to see the watercolor show, the American Watercolor exhibit. And obviously the artist here has used not only dry brush on the trunk of this tree, but they have used some beautiful calligraphy to make all the branches in the tree. So those are things that are kind of important. All right, some basics. Some basics to always remember about watercolor. Work from light to dark. I sometimes pop the darks in, but I'm always starting as pale as I possibly can and then building my darks. And that is an excellent rule to keep in mind. Remember not to add too much water to your paint, but to not go so thick with your paint. And we'll talk about the water balance and about mixing puddles. I usually do all of my warm painting up here and all my cool painting down here. Understand color mixing. Complementary colors are very important in your designing. Values are very important. Use quality paper. As I mentioned before, this is a 140-pound paper, cold press, and it has that a tendency to hold the paint at the same time, give a little bit of a texture. My painting is more successful if my paper is thick enough. 140 is thick enough and it won't wobble, it won't wrinkle. Values, use brushes, good brushes. I use synthetic brushes, but all the brushes I have, oh my goodness, I have so many brushes. I have so many wonderful brushes. This is a Skyflow brush when I'm working big and I want to do a wash. I would just wet the whole paper or half of the paper, whatever area I want to do the wash with. These are wonderful flat brushes, synthetics. These are sables, excuse me. These are my sable brushes, and they are natural hairs. And they are much more expensive, but they hold a lot of water. I use these synthetics because teaching, I think that you're better off starting with a less expensive brush. Good question, yes?
No, I noticed those are long handled.
Actually, these are all considered short handle. These are a little bit longer, but if you were to work with acrylic, thank you for that point, because all short handled brushes are watercolor brushes. These are soft hairs, so these are watercolor brushes. Typically, a longer handle would be a little bit longer, and those are for acrylic and watercolor. And the bristles are always stiffer. So, yes, ma'am, a good point. These appear kind of long. But if you think about it, with the oil painters, Rembrandt and all the artists who worked with brushes often extended their arm to get the painting done. So their brushes are even longer than this. So, yeah, good point. Thank you. All of my brushes are watercolor brushes here. I have a few short handles with my acrylic paint because I like these synthetic brushes. They're sometimes better quality. The watercolor brushes are always wonderful. And then I don't put them back in my watercolor. You have to keep them separated. But watercolor brushes are always short. So very good. Always use good brushes. If they're very cheap, they're going to do, I don't have any that are really after a while they get kind of old and they start doing some funny things. Like when you start, if you can't get a good point out of your brush, then that's when you might need to retire a brush. You should always be able to get that nice point. This is an old one and it's still giving me a pretty good point. Plan your composition using the rule of thirds, division of space, and focal point. Now, this I'm going to try to illustrate in the next couple of exercises. So the first thing I did is I thought I would try to do 4 paintings today. Nope, I don't think I will. I think I'll try to do 2. Okay, so what I thought I would illustrate and for you to try today is to paint a little seascape and a little mountainscape. Now, these are the concepts. We are going to be doing some wet and wet. We're going to be doing some graded washes, and I'll explain these terminologies as I start doing that. And I'm going to keep in mind that the skies will have a mood. They'll tell me about the time of day, trees, grass, land, space, distance, landscape, and seascape. Those are my focuses on atmospheric perspective. So, with that in mind, I'm going to be looking at this idea of and I'm just really playing with a memory of designing a landscape. By the way, this is a little finished watercolor that would be an example of a building in a landscape, but here you will see how I have the sky wet and wet, and I've allowed the clouds to be painted around, so that's just the white of the paper. Sometimes I want to do what is called a resist. So pouring the paint on or applying a wet wash, and a resist is, you can see here that I have used, this is called a fine point or fine line masking pen, and it allows me to paint little tiny lines like the trunks of these trees and the light parts of these. And once I start painting, here's an area where I still have that on the paper. You can see it coming off here, and it's just like a little bit of rubber that's been placed on the paper. There are different kinds of maskings that you can do, and this is an unfinished painting. Gives you some ideas. All right, so let's do a wet and wet sky, but first I'm going to do the landscape idea simply by drawing a few lines. So I'm going to do a seascape here and a mountain landscape here. So I guess I'm just going to go down with a shore. This might be the trunk of this palm tree. And I'm just going to indicate the tree very quickly, maybe some grasses here, maybe a little background landscape, and then as straight a line as I can get here for the water. And I've placed something over here just to have an area of interest, and my focal point is more than likely this area here with the palm tree. And so if I were thinking about my rule of thirds, by placing a line here and a line here, my focal point really could be here or it could be down here. Now, if I wanted it down here, I might be thinking about the sun and the light and the shadows that fall here, and some of the detail that might be happening in this location. So it could be kind of using this space and to draw my eye along here toward the sailboat. I might even show a little landscape that goes behind the boat. All right, so the rest of this is going to be a wet and wet sky. So let's begin, and I'll be using some flat brushes and some little round brushes. So this would be my flat brush, and I'll bring my water over here so you can kind of see how I start to do the mixing. So a wet and wet is of course done with a lot of water. And I went right over my trunk because I'm going to keep the sky fairly light. You may begin your sketch, but do look up from time to time to see my techniques, and then give it a try. Skies are usually darker at the top and lighter as they come down. So I'm going to mix some cobalt blue I'm gonna mix a little bit of my ultramarine. I'm just gonna throw some blues out there. And some cerulean. And, you know, I brought my little sky blue today. I don't have sky blue on my palette. And I thought if anybody wanted to try the sky blue, it's a very opaque color. Can you actually see the white in this? It has a lot of white. It's a very opaque. And so it makes a lovely sky. It has a lot of white in it. I never use white and I never use black, but I do like the opaqueness sometimes. So I've got a couple of different blues going on. And because this is still wet, I'm going to come across the top. And honestly, I forgot to take my little corner down. And I think I've scratched my paper here just a bit. I'm going to shape around, and I'm going to move some of, boy, my paper is drying very quickly. I'm keeping that sky very light as it comes down to the horizon. And letting this little cloud happen right here. And I want to go a bit darker. I touched just a bit of purple into my sky for the top. I want to bring a little emphasis down through here to draw my attention toward the tree. Okay. All right, in and out of a sky very quickly. So this is a wet and wet where you wet your paper and you've allowed your paint to just flow. I am next going to do my water as long as I don't touch that edge. Now my water should be darker with maybe a touch of green in it. I'm thinking that I want my water to be, and I don't need a whole lot of paint on my brush because I have very little water here to show. So I keep a paper towel handy, and I've obviously got a lot of paint on this brush. Maybe I need more paint. Okay, this is a lovely color. I want a little more of the blue. And I have to paint around the sailboat, and I'm doing my strokes flat, which allows for the water to have some ripples of light.
Is the water wet on wet?
No, ma'am. This is what I would call a wash, but right here I'm getting kind of a dry brush. I don't wet it because I want there to be some light. If I wet it, it would not allow me, it would be soft like the sky is very soft here, but this allows me to make my sideways stroke. Good question.
And what color did you use on the water?
I used a cobalt, ultramarine, oh my, I just stuck all my blues together.
Okay.
And whatever blues you have, I think I had a touch of green. Now I'm kind of going back to darken a few spots. And what you don't want to do is touch your sky, because look what happens if you touch your sky. You get little tornadoes up there. Yeah. All right, so I have some green that I'm going to be placing with the mountain back in the background. Okay, so I like that darker, and I got just a little darker in places. All right, so I'm allowing the sky and the water to dry a little bit. Before I go further, I'm going to sketch my mountain scene. I'm going to do a pencil sketch down below of the mountains. Now, you notice that in the watercolor for the beach, I have allowed the horizon to be a low horizon. I'm going to make my mountains a high horizon. So the idea of the mountains are going to be drawn. Are these pencil lines showing up okay? I usually go very light with my pencil lines, but sometimes I need to darken them so you can see. Here I have the mountain ranges very tiny, and as I come forward in the landscape, I let these shapes get bigger. Now right here in the foreground, I'm going to place a pine tree, and I'm just going to let this pine tree poke all the way up to the sky, and going to give just the indication, like I did for the palm tree, that will be the detail and the calligraphy that I will come back and add. Okay, and here I might also add just a little bit of distant trees as they go down the hillside. But this range of color will be changing. I think for this sky, I had planned to paint kind of, can you see in this little watercolor how I have the same kind of sky I did for the beach painting. So then my mountain range also looks blue because the Blue Ridge Parkway, as you know, the mountains have atmospheric perspective and they look blue. I think I'm going to do a sunset. I think I'm going to do a blended wash. Remember, this is wet and wet. I'm going to do a wet and wet here, but I'm going to add some sunset colors. So I'm going to wet this area for the sky, right down to the mountain, the first range of mountains. And because this is going to be a sunset, I'm going to begin with a little purple at the top and move it toward maybe, I'm going to add purple to my blue in this corner right here. So it's not, it has a little blue to it. And I'm going to come across with my purple, and then I'm going to do a little range of the light blue next. And then I'm going to move it toward a bit of pink, pinkish orange. I'll put a little orange to it, pinkish. Let's start with a pink. Oh yeah, there we go. And right here, a little glow at the top of the mountain. Okay, so that has a feeling of the sun going down. And I want to darken one more time. Always keep your sky darker at the top. It's getting dark. That's a very small little sky, but it has a lot going on as far as the mood goes. And I didn't tape my piece of paper down right here. And I don't know how well it's going to work when I try to tape it with it wet. But I have some scratches on my paper, so I'm just going to try to conceal that and tape it at the same time, because this makes that work a little bit better, so I understand where my composition of my tree will be. Now, while I'm still waiting for the sky and the water to dry here, I can go ahead, I think I could go ahead and start back with my seascape and do my sand. So I have the yellow with a touch of red, pink, let's call it pink. This one is a magenta color, but it is a nice kind of combination. And I want this to be very light. So it does have a lot of water in it for the sand. Sand can have a little purple glow to it. I have let it be a little bit light. I might go ahead and make a heavier value of that by putting some earth tone down at the bottom of my landscape for the mountains. This is almost like a little rusty clay area, dirt area, just at the edge. So it's more intense in color. All right, the mountains now need to go from light to dark, based on the fact that the mountains are going to be lighter in the background and get more intense as they come forward. But I'm going to switch now to my the last two things I'll illustrate are the palm tree and the pine tree, because they're sitting on top and they're both going to be darker than what's behind them. So we'll have a dark on light. But I do have a range here that's green, and because I have all this blue, I can mix my green into the blue for this distant, and I'm going to paint with the edge of my little flat brush and go around my sailboat and allow this to have a little triangle sailboat show. And so that's called a negative paint. When you paint around something, you want to keep light. I can just put this little island off here with a few little dots. Now, while I'm at it, I'm going to paint the green that's here in the landscape around the tree and leave the trunk of the tree light. And this will be going a little higher because it's a group of trees, some foliage. It's in the background. All right, so notice that I did a little negative painting here. I left some little light spots for the grasses to grow. And this is called painting from light to dark. So I'm going to get these areas a little darker. Let's see if this is dry enough for me to throw a little light up here into the palm tree. And I think it's dry. It is dry, so I'm going to do a little light strokes. Now, let's do the mountains. And I hesitate to get up here next to the sky. So I think I'll skip that one range and just go with this blue purple color. And that should be a little lighter. So I've just added my water and I'm bringing this range because it's going down behind these hills. And I'm making some variations. And the reason I do that is because the slope catches the light in a different way. And so I'd very much like how that works. And if I wanted to give another little feeling of shadows that might be happening while this is still wet, is I'll just throw some darks in here. And you see what it does? It runs. This is a blending of a little darker value. Sometimes you'll get some funny little things that happen with that. But I've already created a little variation for that mountain. All right, so now I always pay attention to my edges because I want a crisp edge. I don't want it to run, so I cannot paint something next to that. I'm surprised at how quickly this is starting to dry. I want to switch brushes. Now I will have to keep using my flat brush for these mountains, but I think I'm going to switch over to a little round brush, something that will give me the strokes for the pine, for the tree, and also for the darker greens that I'm going to put back here. Now because this green is further away, I want it to be bluer. Okay, so this is going to take a little more blue, and you'll notice that when I'm finished that that has a different value. I want to bring this as darker green, so I'm just going to play with this one first with a lighter blue. Okay, so I'm going to suggest by kind of wiggling my brush down here and around the sailboat, keeping the sailboat white. I'm kind of letting this be a little darker at the bottom of these trees. And I don't want a lot of detail back there because it's obviously fuzzier. We're not putting a lot of suggestion about what kind of trees are back there. But I am dabbing impressionistically, you might say, at the same time trying to keep the shape of the sailboat. Okay. See how I had to go back and straighten that edge out just a little bit around the sailboat. And just dab to suggest texture of these trees. And here, I'm just sort of shaping around a tree and just dabbing to give it the impression of lights and darks in that foliage. I did add some blue to this background. Okay. And I'm now doing just a little texture. All right. Sometimes you have something peeking up behind and it can be a little bit blue that way. it's kind of fun to do miniature paintings like these, especially when we're at this point using our imagination. All right, now my dark green, I'm just going to go for the dark green, and I'm picking up what is called a viridian green, and that is the purest green you can have. And you really never want to paint with pure green. You want to be able to add a little touch of red to that, to brown it, or even use your burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a wonderful earth color that will tone any bright color down. It's kind of like using orange with blue as a complement. But with this green, and I am going to keep toning it down with a bit of the red. I have this little corner, my alizarin ran into my corner, and so I've just been picking it up. But see how much nicer that green gets. It's a nice, rich, dark green. I want to continue making these look like the lighter strokes are in the foreground. And so I am building up that those strokes here and dabbing in for the trees that are here behind the palm tree. Now, I will say, I might need a little lighter green right here to suggest the grasses that are growing here in the foreground. So I'm trying to get them to look like they're part of this foreground space. I'm going back to the background a little bit and suggesting this darker shape for this group of trees that are here. And I'm going to keep bringing that tree, surrounding the tree as though these are behind this palm tree, and just suggesting a few more strokes to get that foreground, these foreground grasses. And they're just hanging out with the palm tree. All right, so this should be a little darker, also with the bottom of this foliage, popping that down. And this could be some ground cover, perhaps, some little viney things that grow. Thank goodness we have things that fill up our beaches that help the vegetation stay in place, whether it be the grasses or planted bushes. And I want this to change so it doesn't look too straight. You know, we could pop some little palm trees there. All right, I have to put some more darks in here, and I want to finish up in the next few minutes and have you ask questions and get started. I will come around and see how you're doing. I'm putting in dark now. I need something in between that light and dark, so I'm making a color that I can go with that suggests more of the palm fronds. And I use the tip of my brush to really add the detail of the palms. And sometimes you do have to keep it dark in places, and you don't want to cover up all your lights, obviously. I haven't done the trunk. Oh my. I have to get the trunk done. I'm getting some heavy stuff here in the middle. I'm going to go with a little more light across the top because the sun obviously will keep it lighter. And I sometimes recognize that I forget the yellows that might be in the tree. You know, sometimes you have a touch of orange or brown in a palm tree. Sometimes those are dead fronds that are hanging down. So if it needs a little bit more color, because obviously having that complement will really help pop your painting. Okay, I need a few more little details here. And I want to darken some spots. I want some variety in this. So darkening right here is a good idea to draw attention to my focal point. I am glazing over some of my washes. So remember, we did wet and wet, and then we did a wash for the mountains. We did a blended wash, actually, for the mountain sky. And I'm putting layers of dark in here to bring out what I want to do in that background. Sometimes I realize I've got too much. I take a paper towel and lift. So I got a little lighter spot right there. What I want to do, hi, watch, you watching, good?
Well, no, I'm just coming in to say we'll be playing table tennis shortly. A lot of noise from that. Would you like me to close the door?
That would be lovely, sir. Thank you for that. I'm going to,
Do your paint.
thank you. I'm going to put my shadow in, and I'm going to run that little purple blue shadow on the backside of the tree. Actually, sort of a gray tree anyway. And then just suggest the palm fronds here as it hits the ground. And next, I'm going to put a little bit of shape on the boat. And I want to do a little texture with my orange through the sand. This is a dry brush. And see, the dry brush gives it the texture. You see how the texture really helps. Okay, and I'm going to put a little more purple into the ground for more texture, as well as shadows from the bumps in the sand. We always have to let the shadows lay flat. Okay. This little painting is close to being done. I might do a little correction up there in that palm tree. I'm ready now to finish my mountains, and I just happen to have this lovely lavender that I was using for my shadows, so I'm going to use that for the top part of my mountains, because those purple lavender mountains would obviously be the lightest value. And here, I don't want green yet. I really want to keep this blue. So I'm going to use my cerulean blue, my cobalt blue, for these mountains that are right here. And that will need to be a little lighter than what was here. So look what I'm doing. I'm kind of going over both. So I'm glazing here and going over this just to darken it up a little without losing all of my variations that are on that hillside. All these different values of blue really do pop and make these mountains work. Now I have a little green on my brush, and that's kind of suggesting that there are trees here. I've got to keep getting more blue and more green as I move across. Now, these are getting bigger shapes. Oh, I said I was going to switch back to my flat brush because I like using this flat brush for certain jobs, my round brush for certain jobs, and this is going to be more green and blue mixed together. And when I'm done with this, I will more than likely give it the texture of some trees. In other words, I'll hit it with some little dots, and it will help to make that whole hillside work as the tree-lined shapes that do exist. Here's a little more green, a little more blue. Blues sort of work as shadows, and the greens also help to make that darker rendering of what's happening in these mountain shapes. So this is a little wet and wet. Do you see how it's changing the contour of the mountains? All right, my foreground here, I'm going to start with, I need to let this dry a little bit. I'm going to use that Skips green, which is a very yellow green, and I'm going to start this shape of these trees that are here in the foreground. I'd already painted this little bit of earth down at the bottom so that you can have a contrast, and we are now going, we have to let this dry before we put the palm tree in. That may give me time to correct that and finish these little shapes here. Now because I'm gonna make this a hillside and let it be really a green hillside, like a little farm landscape. This could even be something that has trees showing on that. And I think I will allow this to even be lighter as it comes through here. So this is going to be a hill that's closer to us. So these are brighter yellow greens. These are bluers as they recede in the mountains. So we're using our memory about how mountains are with lights and darks. Okay? This tree cannot happen while it's this wet, so let me quickly work on my tree up here. I think that sometimes I need to lighten, and that's what it feels like I need to do right now, is lighten up this tree. So I have lifted some color, and I want it to look more beautiful.
Don't we all?
So when you have a tree that doesn't look really beautiful, what do?
Throw the paper away. That's
Throw
right.
the
Start it all over again, right?
I feel like it just needed to be lightened, and I think it already looks a little better. And turn it out into a bush. Also, I feel like my trunk should get darker. I think that I need to make a really dark line on part of the trunk. So I'm going to use this green and red in an opposite way to make a dark. Oh, I could put purple. Put all your dark colors together and you will get a dark color. Okay, so this is what I call a dark color. And because the shadow is falling this way, I'm going to put a few dots of really dark into my tree, and I'm going to run a dark line all the way down. That might be a little heavy. And I will soften it a bit, but it makes that tree more stable into the ground and gives it a little bit of pop. If the tree is indeed, now I feel like I should be doing not so much of the dark now, but a green, a darker green here. And so it's, at some point you have to tell yourself to stop or you're only going to make it worse. All right, this is a very full palm tree. Maybe what might help is if I make a few little palms that come up here. Now, I don't know if I'm right or wrong about that, but this will show you what you can do. And this should be bluer. This would actually be bluer because they are kind of in the distance.
I'm going to make my curve.
And
Yeah.
now I've made little palms in the background. You know, sometimes we just want to play and have fun, which obviously I'm starting to do. So I need to stop myself and say, okay, you've got the idea. And another thing that I wanted to do, which I hope is happening, is a little bit of movement with the sky. I do like, now we're taping this off, and we can see that this mountain, let's focus here for just a second. This is the tree, and I think I'm dry enough to go with that. I do know that I need to darken and put some detail here. Now, if we're looking at just our little seascape, I know we've been playing with two paintings at one time and going back and forth. And sometimes the advantage of doing something like that is simply so that you can let something dry. All right, the trunk of this tree for the Christmas tree, the pine tree, is to give it a sense of structure. I don't go all the way through with the darks here. Oh, I might do a few little trunks here. This is calligraphy. When I talk about the calligraphy, it's using a really nice fine point to make branches of trees, and I think that calligraphy is pretty important. Remember what we talked about. We talked about wet and wet, graded wash, which goes from dark to light, and dry glazing, putting layers on. We didn't do any pouring. It's not typical when we're painting with a brush. Calligraphy is that which we use with our small lines, and even the small strokes we make for the palm trees. That's a bit of calligraphy. So is this with the grasses. Okay, that's using calligraphy. If I wanted a little detail also on the sailboat, that would just be touches. Any little lines or strokes that you make with the water, that again is called calligraphy. All right, so my pine tree is going to be made with very dark green, and I am going to just take the end of the brush and begin to add branches of shapes. I'm thinking about the overall shape of what this pine tree would be like, with having some air spaces, some gaps that help to say, we can see sky through. Actually, what we're seeing is mountains through all of this. We are seeing the shapes of the hills and the mountains. All right, I am finishing up for our exercise review today of painting different techniques, and the last little bit will be just putting in these branches of the tree, maybe doing a little bit more right in this one little area, and suddenly we start having the sense that, aha, maybe we are getting a pine tree out of this. And the little ends should have just the feeling of the pine needles, and I'm just going to let this come all the way down, even though I probably intended to make a bit more detail out of the background. I want this to be very dark, and the way I'm getting it dark is using my red and green. Oh, yeah, that's pretty dark. All right.
It's amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember to have fun with watercolor, and that there's a lot you can do just even with your imagination, like we've just now done with what we did. We were using our imagination to do two little watercolor paintings, a seascape and a mountainscape. All right, thanks for joining us.